Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's time to rise and shine. All right, let's see. I did give a stick mic to Daryl so that all of our viewers from home will be able to hear, because no matter how well-spoken and clear and bold your voice is, they can't hear anything you're saying at home if you make a comment. So if it's more than about one or two words that I can repeat, if it's a longer answer, please wait for Daryl to get over to you, because we really want them to be in on the class too. It's really important for them. And it's important for us too, for them to be in on that. They're part of the church family too. Hello, Gerald and Charlene and others. Okay, well, last week we kind of got into, actually I'm going to have to forward this because I thought we would get finished with our lesson, but we only got like halfway finished with it. So we went into a lesson on a story of faith and courage, and I chose to illustrate this with the 12 spies 40-day journey. Of course, only 2 of them came back with positive, encouraging, let's go get them reports, and the other 10 we're kind of chicken about it. That's the area that the red line there, they went from south to north over a 40-day period. And Moses had told them to check out what kind of terrain it is, what kind of the cities were, what kind of the people, what did they look like, were they big, what kind of land, was it fertile, and so forth. And so we talked about those kinds of things. And so when all was said and done, actually you can tell that the land was pretty fertile just by looking at what they brought back there. And then we got to about right here where the tide had begun to shift. First, they were all excited about what they had seen in the land of Canaan. And they'd come back and they were talking about how big everything was and how it was so impressive. And then the way I view this is, little by little, the air began to let out of the room, basically, and things began to take a much more pessimistic turn as people started thinking about, but then there was those giants that we saw that would be pretty scary. And so we'll talk about those a little bit, have a little bit of new information on that. I was visiting with Dan about that the other day. But okay, so everything is pretty negative and pessimistic about them being able to go and get the land. And then there are only 2 who were positive and encouraging about it, and that would be Caleb and Joshua. Of course, this whole series is about the life of Joshua, but in this case, you have, just kind of out of the blue, if you didn't already know anything about Caleb, he kind of hops up there in front of everyone, and they're about at their wits' end. They're thinking about stoning Joshua and Caleb for trying to be the positive force in the crowd. But Caleb silences the people before Moses, says, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can surely do it." And so, what are some things that we can know about Caleb by this statement? What are some things that we can know about Caleb by that statement? Because remember, the tide is going the other way. You have like all of the Israelite nation being convinced by the other 10 spies who are supposed to be leaders of their tribes too, just like Caleb was a leader of Judah and Joshua was a leader of the tribe of Ephraim. And so they all come back. They all saw the same thing, but these are the only 2 that had good things to say. And so with so much on the line, and the people even thinking about and planning to stone Joshua and Caleb, and probably Moses too, what are some things that we can know about Caleb by this statement that he makes and how he makes this statement? Okay, come on up here, and we'll let Gerald and Charlene hear straight from Ethel. There you go.
He had a positive attitude.
He had a positive attitude. And what difference does that make, Ethel, that someone has a positive attitude? Stay right here for just a second. What difference does that make that he had a positive attitude when he jumped up there like that?
Well, he knew God was with him and they could do it.
Yeah, they had seen other things, hadn't they? That wasn't the first thing that was positive about it. Any other thoughts on that? What are some other things that you can say about Caleb, or that you can just know by him jumping up there like that and saying, we should go up and take possession of the land? Jack.
They left Egypt with false gods, and Caleb knew that God can do anything.
Yeah, they left Egypt with a whole lifetime of not knowing really anything except the false gods, all the gods who are represented by the 10 plagues. So that didn't really go well for Egypt, did it? They learned real fast that those false gods didn't have anything on Yahweh, God. Any other thoughts? What are some things we can know about Caleb by his statement, by how he got up and said that? Did you raise your hand? Oh, that was just you were just doing that, okay. Okay, Daryl.
Well, the entire assembly must have really expected Caleb, because when he stood up, they got quiet. I mean, Caleb silenced the people. He silenced that whole crowd.
You know, I think you're right. I don't know what they thought. I know that I hadn't really thought about that, but I think that probably Joshua and Moses were not surprised, maybe by his willingness to jump up there at that time, because again, you have Moses, who is the mentor. You have Joshua, who's been mentored all this time to be a more of a spiritual leader. Moses is the spiritual leader. Joshua was the right-hand man, the military general. And so the goal here is, over the course of these 40 years, actually they don't know at this point that it's going to be 40 years. They think that they're going right into it. At this point, they're sending spies in because they think that these battles are going to take place like immediately. They find out that it didn't, because they just weren't ready to go into a battle, because they didn't understand God. They didn't have a relationship with him. And so that's kind of why they wound up in the wilderness for so long. So yeah, I made a note here that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, from Luke 6:45 and Matthew 12:34. And certainly that would be something, when the pressure is on, and you got to do something that counts. What comes out of your mouth is what you've been thinking about. It's what you're prepared for all this time. And so he gets up, and that's, boom, we should go up and take possession of the land. He had no doubts that this could be done. He had a positive attitude. Like Ethel said, he had a positive attitude because he had already seen all the things that God had done for them up until that point. They had already seen the 10 plagues. They had already gotten to take part in the crossing of the Red Sea on dry ground. They had already been eating out of God's hand, manna and quail every single day. So there were a lot of things that they had gotten to see. A pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day to be with them and protect them. And so he had seen so much. Now, why the other people couldn't see that and why they didn't have that faith and that courage, I don't know. But certainly Caleb and Joshua and Moses had that. But he was a man of faith and courage. That was evidently his gift, was being a man of faith. There are different Holy Spirit gifts. Certainly he would have been gifted with faith and courage. So what does this verse say about Joshua and Caleb's relationship? So when you think about that, because really it was Moses. It was Joshua right there. The story's about them. What does this verse say about Joshua and Caleb's relationship? And anything else that you want to... Oh, let's go over here to Zach Schaefer, because there's a lot that could be said right here. When you think about this, you can tell a lot just from looking at just a few words right there about what does this say about Joshua and Caleb's relationship.
Sorry, we were doing some research on your previous question, so we might back up a bit here.
Back up and then we'll go
to talk about why does Caleb have so much faith? We were doing some research, and because I remembered that Caleb wasn't a full Israelite by birth, and we found his father is a Kenizzite, which is one of the people who live in the promised land. So his father is from a people who live in the promised land that has yet to be conquered. So, and perhaps his mother is from the tribe of Judah, which is why he's reckoned into the tribe of Judah. But maybe that speaks to Caleb as being someone who's come in from the outside and doesn't take the relationship with Yahweh to be for granted. He's someone who, people who come in from the outside and then are like that, they really have a different kind of perspective that can be really faithful. So maybe that's one reason why.
And it's that way even today, isn't it, too? Sometimes we get a little bit lethargic, if we've been raised, in the church and around, all things church and all things faith. We get to, sometimes we take a lot of things for granted. But when you come in from outside, where things haven't gone well, you didn't have Christ in your life, and then you see what a difference it makes when you have church family, when you have the gift of the Holy Spirit, when you have something to look forward to, when you have this wonderful life in Christ, it does make a difference, and it does make you more bold to say things. Daryl.
So if you take a look at the promise, God said he would give them the promised land. He didn't say he'd help them take it. He didn't say I will be with you in the war that takes it. He said, you go up and I will give you that land. Now, take a look at what happened 40 years later when they took Jericho. What'd they do? They marched around Jericho. That's all they did to take Jericho. Maybe he understood God's being with them meant God was going to do the hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. Good thoughts. I had a couple more things here before we get on into verse 31 of Numbers 13. Why do you think God made sure that Joshua had someone like Caleb in his life, in his inner circle? Why do you think God made sure that Joshua had somebody like Caleb in his life and in his inner circle like that?
Sometimes you need an encourager.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, say that to Daryl there. All right.
Sometimes you need an encourager to tell you that you can do this.
Why? Why is
you're
that?
Bashful.
Huh?
You're bashful.
Because you're bashful? No. Sometimes it is nice just to have that encourager in your life. Because you get a different opinion. Okay, Wilma?
Well, Jesus had Peter, and I think a lot of Peter.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's kind of like Peter to me.
Jumps up there, he's ready to do it, and you find out later that he's probably a lot more like Peter. We talked a little bit about that last week. After all these years go by, and then he chooses the place for his land allotment, his tribe's land allotment, that would be among the toughest, where a lot of the giants were still left over there, the Anakim, descendants of the Nephilim and so forth.
There's strength in numbers, and the Lord talks about it's better for two to walk along in case one stumbles. That encouragement that Ethel was talking about, just the fact that when danger approaches, if there's two there rather than one, there's strength in that.
Yeah, sometimes all it takes is just that one extra person. And that's the way it is when it comes to church family too. You invite somebody to church, and they're much less likely to come if they don't think that they have at least one other person that they can sit with. But that just having one other person can make a huge difference in whether a person feels like they're part of the family or not. Just one person can make a huge difference in that. And so obviously this kind of story helps us evaluate the kind of people that you should be for others, and it helps you evaluate the kind of people that you should let be close to you, to be in your inner circle. Because you do want the kind who would be encouraging, who would be people of faith, men and women of faith, and courage. All right, let's go ahead and look at I'm not going to have it up on the screen other than a picture, but it's a good picture, isn't it? There you have Joshua and Caleb up there. Numbers chapter 31. Numbers chapter 13, verse 31. We'll do 31, 32, and 33. But the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. Now, how did they know that they were stronger? There must have been something that would let them think or make them think, these people, they're spying on them. So I don't know how close up they got to the people that they were going to be, trying to conquest. But they could tell, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than us. And we find out. And they spread out among the Israelites a bad report or a negative report. The spies did. Well, most of them did. About the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. Now, I thought that was an interesting statement. The land we explored devours those living in it. Possibly a land overcome with inner conflict or civil war. The next statement is, all the people we saw there are of great size. Okay? All the people we saw there are of great size. And we're not talking, 6 feet. We're talking 9 feet, 10 feet. We see in Deuteronomy 3, verses 8 through 11, we find out that he was like among the last of the Rephaim, who were also descendants of giants. And you remember how big his bed was? Huh? It was really big, wasn't it? It was 14 feet long. Yeah, 14 feet long and 6 feet wide. And so that would be bigger than a couple of California kings, I would think. So there's a lot of talk about giants. Also in Deuteronomy 2, 9 through 11, talks about the Anakites being tall, like the Rephaites. In Deuteronomy 1, 27, 28, the Amorites are tall, and they're associated with the Anakites. So there's a good chance that the Amorites were not just violent, mean people, disobedient, in your face, I don't need God kind of people. These were also very, very big people. These were descendants of the Nephilim that you read about in Genesis 6. Now, I don't want to make this whole lesson about the Nephilim and the giants, but, where it says there that in Genesis 6 that the whole earth had become wicked when the sons of God looked at the daughters of men, and from them came these Nephilim. Now, I know there's more than one theory about what exactly that means, but if we're taking it at face value here, this could, very well be some kind of a hybrid situation. And so they're not only fighting against people. These are people who are at least not just human. Then it kind of gets into the weird zone. So maybe that's a lesson for another day. So whatever the case, these are very powerful, tall, strong people. A land that devours those living in it. In verse 33 of Numbers 13, we saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Now again, back to, even if they were 10 feet tall, at this point, they had already walked across the Red Sea on dry ground. I don't know how tall the walls of the Red Sea were right there as the waters were up on either side of them, but it was more than 10 feet if the walls of the water are back like that and they get to walk through on dry ground. So, yeah, these giants were scary, but maybe, just looking at these giant descendants of the Nephilim, that would be pretty unnerving to think that you had to go up against them. And I think sometimes we as humans have a short memory, don't we? We have a very short memory of what God has done for us. So what I'm seeing happening here is unbelief that fills the heart with discouragement. When we have a lack of faith or unbelief or low levels of belief and faith, it fills our hearts with discouragement. And you don't see things like Caleb jumping up and say, let's go get them. Unbelief, it overlooks the promises and the power of God. Unbelief magnifies every danger and every difficulty. Everything they see that could go wrong, they're thinking, well, it's going to happen to us. This is too scary to do. So let's go on to Numbers 14. One of these days we'll have to have a series on Nephilim and Rephaim and Amorites and Anakites and kind of get into that a little bit more, because Daryl, I didn't think I would get out of that.
Well, no, we're not very far removed from God taking out the entire Egyptian army. Okay? I mean, the 10-foot tall guys are only important if God is not on your side.
Right.
But if you've got God on your side and he just took out Pharaoh and his entire army, you're in pretty good shape.
You would think that if they had gone through the Red Sea ordeal and the 10 plagues and all that seeing a few giants wouldn't be a big deal. But
no big deal.
It may not be just a few giants that they're going after. It could very well be, during these 400 years that the Israelites were in the land of Goshen in Egypt. I mean, we're only a country of 250 years. They had been there for 400 years, plus however far back beyond that Abraham was. So Abraham and God were talking about it 700 years before the spy mission happened. So there's a lot of opportunity there for the community of giants to get bigger, to grow, to take over, to just be all in that land of Canaan. So it could have been a pretty scary task to look at and to see, we're going to go up against them. So far they had only been up against the Egyptian army. I say only. That's not really an only, is it? That's a huge thing. All right. Yeah. God, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, say that.
Oh, sorry. I said that, with the Egyptians, they didn't actually fight them. God did it. He did the plagues, and he separated the ocean or the sea. And
so you're saying there's a difference between God doing your fighting for you versus you feeling like you're going to have to go in and duke it out with somebody that is obviously more powerful than you are.
But God said he'd give them the land.
He did.
So
he said he'd give them the land, and he would go before them. He'd drive them out.
Remember, too, they've been whining for
What's that?
40 years.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. They'd been what?
Whining for 40 years.
Yeah.
Ever since God got them out of Egypt and got them on the way to their own country and their own life, they did nothing but whine and complain and gripe.
And this is just at the beginning, and they kept on whining, didn't they? I mean, this might be two years into it, but still, they've been whining for at least 2 years, couple of years, and before that.
God was very patient.
Yes, God was very patient with them, just like he's very patient with us. Okay, so in Numbers 14, that night all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died back in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And again, I think, why are they being so negative and so pessimistic? Well, they're obviously walking by sight. They're not walking by faith. Verse 5 of Numbers 14. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. All right, so what's that mean when somebody tears their clothes? If you're Jewish, that's like a big statement of being upset. Do I have that right, Zach? They're really, really upset about that. They're in mourning. It's about the worst thing you can do. It's like, oh no, Uncle Jeb tore his clothes. He was really upset about this. Said to the entire assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. They probably didn't tear their clothes lightly either. I mean, they knew that their clothes, everything that they had been given, their food, their clothes, their shoes, were gifts of God. You look in Deuteronomy 29:5, and as Daryl pointed out a few weeks ago, their clothes never wore out, did they? Wouldn't that be weird? If your clothes never wore out, and your shoes never wore, you wouldn't have any excuse to go shopping. That'd be sad. But anyway, I'm not for sure how many TJ Maxx they had there in the wilderness. But anyway, their clothes and their shoes never wore out. They knew this was a gift from God, but things were getting bad. The number of people who believed and had courage were this many, and the number who were, didn't believe and were scared to do what God wanted them to do, that was pretty much the rest of everyone. So if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Again, this is Joshua and Caleb talking. And will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. So they're kind of putting that word back on them. Because remember back in chapter 13, Numbers 13, verse 32, the people are moaning and complaining, whining. He said, the land we explored devours those living in it. That's scary. And so then next chance they get, Caleb and Joshua say, do not be afraid of the people of this land, because we will devour them. All right, so it's not just the land that was devouring, evidently. The size of these people, they were great warriors, they were violent. And so this was not a situation they wanted to go into lightly, but they're reminding them, we're going to devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But the whole assembly talked about what? Stoning them. After all that, picture this, you got Moses and Aaron. I mean, they're pulling out all the stops to be convincing here. They are face down on the ground. Their fearless leader, Moses, face down on the ground in front of the whole Israelite assembly. You have Joshua and Caleb up there. You have Joshua and Caleb tearing their clothes. They're speaking in their best, most motivational, inspirational way. They're doing everything they can to convince these people, this is what we need to do. The Lord is with us. And when it gets down to it, the whole Israelite assembly talked about stoning them. It's like, did you not hear anything we said? Does it not matter that Moses was flat on his face? Does it not matter that Joshua and Caleb were tearing their clothes? Does it not matter all the things that you've seen God do and bless your life in the past? Then, and this is a big then, Numbers 14, verse 10. Then the glory of the Lord, cue the music from the Lone Ranger, comes in. The glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. All right, and that's a big deal. That's how God would come down in this cloud, come down over the tent of meeting, and Moses would go talk to him. God would talk to him like one friend talks to another. Interesting, though, because, in Exodus 33, 8 through 11, says the people would come out of their tents and stand there at their tent doors. When they would see the cloud come down, they would come down and they would worship God. That would be, I guess that's the only time, I don't know. They would worship God when they would see that cloud come down. In Exodus 20, they would hear thunder and see the lightning, but they told Moses they didn't want to hear the actual words of God. You go find out what he said and come back to us, because if God talks directly to us, we will surely die. And so they were content to stand back and watch the thunder and the lightning. Yeah, that's good enough for me, so we'll just worship when we see thunder and lightning. That's pretty deep there. I guess it was for them, I don't know. So then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt?" Okay, this is God speaking out of a cloud. So I'm assuming all the people were hearing at that point was lightning and hearing thunder and seeing lightning. But God's talking to Moses. "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me?" Now there's a difference in, believing in me versus believing me. Believe there is a God versus believing in God, however you want to say that. There's a difference in saying, if Ray tells me something that I believe is true, and I say, "Well, I believe you, Ray," there's a difference in saying that versus saying, "I believe in you, Ray." That means I don't only believe what you say is true, man, I'm on board with it. You've convinced me. I want to move forward whole hog, just like Caleb and Joshua. So verse 26 of chapter 14 of Numbers, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints against these grumbling Israelites, so tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do the very thing I heard you say.'" So basically God's saying, okay, you want to grumble? You want to complain? I'm going to give you something to grumble and complain about, right? Huh? Might as well, okay. So he says, in this wilderness, your bodies will fall, just like you wanted. You're the one who said it. Every one of you, 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who's grumbled against me, not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home, except for who?
Joshua and Caleb.
Joshua and Caleb. And why them? Because they had faith and courage. They were obedient. They responded with action. They weren't just faithful in that they believed that God existed or that what he said was true. They had an obedient faith, which is the exact kind of faith that we're called to today. Not just to believe that God exists and that all these things about God are true and how he says that we can be saved is true, but an obedient faith will go ahead and obey. And that was one thing that they did not want to do. Verse 31, as 14, as for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. Yes. Wait, hang on just a second. Here he comes.
I look back at that verse 3 when they were complaining and they was talking about we need to go back to Egypt because they felt like this group of people in this new land were going to, as a mentioned here, so the little ones will become plunder. God responds to that statement there in that verse 31. He just reminds them, your children, however, whom you said would become prey, he was going to bring them into the land. Only the 20s and up won't make it.
Right, so he didn't forget.
He didn't forget what their concern was about, and he answered that.
It's so neat how God is consistent from then till now. He has always had a great concern for the well-being of children, hasn't he? And he did then too. And they were worried about their children. He comes along and says, don't worry about your children. They're going to be just fine. So what are your thoughts about the children of the rebellious Israelites having to suffer in the wilderness for 40 years? What are your thoughts about that? The children of the rebellious Israelites having to suffer in the wilderness for 40 years. What are your thoughts? What comes to mind when you think about that?
What they could have had.
Whoop, what?
What they could have had that had gone on into the land.
Okay, go ahead and say that to Daryl.
What they could have had if they had gone on into the land.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Jack? Hang on.
It's going to be an example for them. They see their parents, older people, suffer the consequences of unbelief. It's going to be an example for them.
You know, I think it's also a reminder to us that our actions matter. Our actions matter. What are you thinking about that, Stacy? Got any thoughts? Wait, come over here. Yeah, and you didn't raise your hand, but all right. Speaking of faith and courage. All right.
I mean, I think that's a lesson for all of us, that our actions do matter for our children. And we see that all the time, you know, especially maybe at school. The choices that parents make aren't always the best for what's for them or for their children. And so I think, you know, we all ought to look at that lesson.
As a teacher, you see that a lot, don't you? I mean, when you least expect it, expect it. Teachers get to see a lot of different kind of parenting styles, and the parents, their actions mean either good or bad things for their children, but our actions matter. Of course, the bright side to them having to suffer right along is that they learn from their parents. They learn so that they don't want to do that again like their parents. An outsider might look at this and think that it's kind of harsh, but lessons that we can get from this story would be to trust God and live life accordingly. Let me read the last few verses here of chapter 14. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it's like to have me against you. If I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community which has banded together against me. They will meet their end in this wilderness. Here they will die. So the men of Moses, So the men of Moses, Moses had sent to explore the land, who returned and made the whole community grumble. They didn't have a very good ending there, as you can see. Made the whole community grumble against him by spreading a bad report. These men who were responsible for spreading the bad report about the land were struck down and died of a plague before the Lord. So I guess there was more than one plague that came along. More than 10. Of the men who went to explore the land, only Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, survived. So that is our two-part lesson on the life of Joshua, a story of faith and courage. You are dismissed. Thank you.